Hi everyone, and welcome to our latest webinar, Stalking the Predator, presented by Daniel Ross. Speaking today will be myself. I'm Ryan Deegan, your Asheville Youth Center host. And we also have Daniel Ross and Michael Demerit speaking. And I will introduce them in a moment. Today is a webinar, and it's a 6th event in our webinar series. It's going to be 2 hours long with high-quality audio and a stronger PowerPoint presentation. You'll be able to ask questions from any computer using our interactive features and with a microphone or two today. So if you'd like to ask a question via your microphone, you may want to be logged in using your telephone, and I'll go over that in a moment. We have 130 people joining us from 12 different countries, and those countries include Poland, England, Canada, Ireland, Estonia, Norway, Japan, Mexico, New Zealand, Australia, the Netherlands, and the United States. And we're scheduled for 2 hours today. Audio settings, make sure you're clicked on the right tab. You have 2 choices. You either listen and speak through your telephone, and if you click on the telephone tab, it'll give you a number to call and some other instructions, and it's very easy. Or, of course, you just listen through your speakers on your computer and can speak through the microphone. And, of course, your microphone is initially muted, so don't worry about speaking. Please explore the features. There's a full screen mode. There's Ask a Question, where you can send us questions for the presenters. And we highly encourage this. Let me go over our next couple of events. We have our next video seminar in 2 months, and that's Thursday, September 20th from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. And it'll be on the topic of Jungian Chinese culture. We'll have Bettina Wilhelm, which is the daughter of Richard Wilhelm, and Sarah Liu. It'll actually be a great event coming up. We've got 2 more after that. On November 3rd, we've got our political event with the CGU Institute of San Francisco discussing the election, of course, Barack Obama and Mitt Romney, right before they duke it out at the polls. And then on November 29th, we have our Zerg series, which will be the End of the World seminar. And of course, we want to have that on November 29th in case the world does end. So we'll go ahead and get that out of the way. And we put up the nice 2012 poster with the mountains just getting engulfed by the ocean. So we'll see if that actually happens. I need to tell everybody that we have no commercial support for presenters, topics, or programs. There is no pharmaceutical industry support of any kind associated with us today. And there will be an online survey afterwards, so please go ahead and fill it out if you get a chance. There's a recording warning we're going to be taking today, so when asking a question, if we put you on the mic or if you send me one, please let me know if you want to remain anonymous. All right, our presenters today, we've got Daniel Ross, who has worked in the hospice for over 20 years and in the healthcare industry for over 30 years. He serves on the board of trustees at the CGU Institute, the CGU Center in Evanston, Illinois. And he has recently been accepted into the analyst training program at the CGU Institute of Chicago. And then we have Michael Demerit. He is a producer, writer, and director on numerous film and television projects for the last 20 years, and a member of the Directors Guild of America, and has served as an assistant director on such well-known series as LA Law, Star Trek Voyager, and Star Trek Enterprise. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass the presentation over to Dan Ross so that he can put on our great event today. So just one moment, please. All right, Dan, I've gone ahead and opened your mic. I'm going to make you the presenter.
Very good. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. So we've gone ahead and made you the presenter, and now what you want to do is hit the big play button on your interface to show us your screen. Wonderful. Now we see you. So I'm going to go ahead and mute myself. I'm going to mute myself and let you take over.
Very good. Good evening, everybody. We're going to have a lively discussion around 2 films. These 2 films, which we hope you had a chance to view prior to the presentation, because we're going to talk about some of the detail in those films, are very different films and in some ways very similar. One of the reactions that I had coming out of those films that was also shared with people that I know, was the feeling of being stalked, the feeling of being overwhelmed, almost as if your sense of the world has been turned upside down. And we're going to talk about why that is, because if you look at the content of the films, they're very different. One's about a cult and a girl that is part of that cult and then escapes the cult and then goes to visit her sister for a period of time. And the rest of the film we see as backflashes to her experience on the farm with this cult. The second film is about a mother that's raising a psychopathic child. And so on the surface, both those films are different in content, but we leave them and experience them very similarly. And what I'm going to talk about is the experience of the intrapsychic predator that we all are familiar with. If we look at the difference between these films and predator films in general, and what I mean by that are all the films that we've grown used to around monsters and characters like Freddy Krueger and Michael Myers. They all have some similar components to it, but one that's very common is that the killer's defeated. There's a hero or heroine involved, and there's some resolution at the end of the film. These two films that we're talking about, Marcy May Marlene first, and we'll talk about that film first, and then we need to talk about Kevin, are different because there isn't that kind of resolution. We are left without a sense that this predator that we experience has died. So what it does, interestingly, it forces us to look inward. And we're not used to those films. And starting as Mike and I were talking a little bit about what that means in an American market versus a European market. Both these films did better in Europe or overseas in general than it did in America, which I find interesting and want to talk more about later when we get into some of the detail. But these are not films that are going to be very popular. In fact, you may have had some difficulty getting a hold of them. And we're going to talk about some of the reasons for that. We're also going to circle back to a seminar that happened a couple of weeks ago that I had an opportunity to see about Jung and neuroscience, because I will be talking about the neurobiology around this type of experience, and particularly how the predator, the archetypal predator, can emerge in the midst of psychotherapy. And we're talking about what Murray Stein addressed at the beginning of the neuroscience seminar was two types of thinking from a Jungian standpoint that he called lunar thinking and solar thinking. Lunar thinking is based on image, it's based on emotion, whereas solar thinking is very directed thinking and language-based. What I find very interesting is that what we know about neurobiology is that the brain is divided up into two hemispheres that mirror those definitions that Jung came up with in his very first book, or one of his first books. In fact, the book that he claimed caused the breakup with Freud was The Psychology of the Unconscious. And if we look at neurobiology, the right brain is imagistic-based and is emotionally based. In fact, the right brain houses our emotional memory. It's the left brain that's reason-based and language-based and follows this directed thinking that I was talking about. So we're going to talk more about that later because I think it fits in very nicely. But we're going to go to the right brain and talk about an important story that I think it's important to both movies, but particularly this first movie, when we talk about Marcy May Marlene. And we're going to talk about this story, and then we're going to dive into the movie because I think it's important to have this background. If you haven't read the story of Bluebeard, which is a Grimm's fairy tale, I'll tell you very briefly what it's about with some of the important detail. There's this wealthy man that had this huge mansion and was looking for a bride, and he had this blue beard that was rather obnoxious. And he went to his next-door neighbor, and there were two sisters that lived there. And there are different versions of this story that roamed around Europe. And so I'm going to tell you the story that, with some of the detail that Clarissa Pinkola Estes put into her book that I'll talk about tonight as well, Women Who Run with the Wolves, because the very first chapter in that book addresses the predator. But in this story of Bluebeard, Bluebeard goes to the next-door neighbor and offers to take out the sisters. The older sister doesn't like the blue beard. She's turned off by it. There's something in her instincts that says this is not good. The younger sister ignores that and decides to go out with him, and he wines and dines her, offers her a wonderful feast, and she falls in love, and they get married. And on their wedding night, he comes to her with the keys to the house, all the keys to the house. And he says to her, you have access, and you can bring your family, you have access to the entire house, any room you want except one. And the key to this room is a forbidden room, and you can't enter that room. You are forbidden to enter that room. But he doesn't tell her where the room is. So he leaves, the sister comes over, and they start looking for this room right away, checking each room with this small key, the smallest of all the keys. They find the room, they open the door, and inside, the younger sister goes in, and inside the room are the bodies of his previous wives that he killed and dismembered, and the room is filled with blood, and she's so frightened that she drops the key. When she picks up the key, she tries to wipe it off, but it's too late. The key is stained, and not only is the key stained, but the key seems to be bleeding. She tries to hide the key. Her husband comes home, and he immediately asks for the keys, and she says she doesn't know where the little key is, and he knows right away that she entered the forbidden room. So he announces that she has to die. And she pleads for her life and asks for at least 15 minutes that she can get herself together and pray and prepare for death. And he gives her that. In that time, she goes upstairs to meet with her sister and asks her sister to see if her brothers are coming to save her. And during that time, after 15 minutes, he starts climbing the stairs, yelling her name, and she keeps asking her older sister if their brothers are coming. And sure enough, at the very last minute, of course, the brothers ride into the castle on horseback and slay Bluebeard. Some of the interesting detail of this story is the key that is permanently stained and, in fact, bleeds after she has gone into this room. It reminds us of this psychic stain that we experienced after watching these two films. There's a psychic stain to it that lingers for quite a while. The other interesting component is that this is it's the youngest sister that gets seduced by Bluebeard. We're going to talk about that in the context of our movie, Martha. Okay. Now I will refer back to it. A couple of quotes from Pinkola Estes from her book. Even with the best parental nurture, the intruder's sole assignment is to turn all crossroads into closed roads. And what that means is, and the reason she addresses this predator or this intruder in the first chapter is for and she's talking about a woman, but I would say for anybody who's going through the individuation process, they are having to confront the predator. And if you're a psychotherapist and you work with clients, you know that when a patient comes to you and is initiating therapy, very often as they are moving into new realms or there are new experiences in their life, very often it's common for dreams to come up that are very nightmarish and in which have characters that resemble the predator. And what she's saying is, even with the best parental nurture, the intruder, or what we're calling the predator, is trying to destroy all avenues of growth for the person they inhabit. Now, if you remember the movie, and Patrick is the leader of the cult, the intruder archetypally reminds us of Patrick's intrusions into the people's homes in the middle of the night, which is how they made their living. And there was this paradox that in the beginning was the seduction of Martha, where she thought that they made their own food, they grew their own food, they had this communal type living arrangement. And it's not till later that she discovers the true nature of how they live and their murderous nature. The intruder enters into one's life when it's most vulnerable and most in need of change. That's why the case study that I'm going to talk about later, this person was embarking on a big change in their life, new relationships, and this sparked a change in her relationship psychically with the predator, and the predator emerged in her dreams, and I'll talk about that a little later. What this predator or intruder does, it whispers in our ears we can't do something, precisely at the time that we're planning something new, or new project, or new relationship, or we're not good enough, or we'll be abandoned, or we're not lovable. Those are the types of things it whispers into our ears. Another quote from Piccola Estes: developing a relationship with the wildest nature, which is part of the individuation process she talks about, is an essential part of a woman's individuation. And what she says is the woman must go into the dark to confront the carnage that's left behind of the dead parts of herself. And this is depicted in the Bluebeard story with the forbidden room. But she must be able to return from that room and not fall under the power of the predator, and must not be irreparably trapped, captured, or killed there or on the way back. And again, the first chapter in the book is titled Stalking the Intruder. And I borrowed that for our title, because I think it's important for us to understand what's going on here. So the first thing that we're talking about when we talk about Marcy May Marlene is and the intrapsychic predator. The first part of this is the seduction. And I want to talk about this in some detail. And I will tell you, when I first presented this at the Evanston Center to a group of live people, that day, synchronistically, I overheard on the radio a report on NPR about a woman in Europe who had started a training, a seminar for young girls to understand the nature of what she called lover boys. And what it was about was young boys that would hang around schools and try to attract young girls and seduce them. And these were very good-looking young boys. They were very seductive, and these girls could very easily get them to fall in love with them. And then over time, these lover boys, as she called them, would try and get these girls to have sex with multiple partners, and eventually this would escalate to the point that they would get caught up in prostitution, pornography, and it would become very difficult for them to get out. And the teacher that was presenting this was a woman who, when she was 13 years old, got caught up in this. What I found very interesting was her title, because she didn't call these men predators. She called them lover boys, because that's the way they would be perceived by the young girls. The young girls would not be able to identify them as predators if she had used that type of language or imagery, because that's not how they experienced them in the beginning. So when we talk about the seduction in this film, what I find interesting here is the very title, and Mike, you can speak to this as well, but this is what struck me about the title, because it's a strange title. It's made up of 3 names that are used for Martha in the film. The first one is her given name, Martha. The second one is the name Patrick gives her, which is Marcy May. And the last one is Marlene Lewis, I think her last name was, which is kind of a collective name that they use when somebody calls up on the phone. I thought that was very symbolic.
It's a false name, right?
It's a false name, right. But also a collective name that they all used if they picked up the phone. If any of the girls picked up the phone, they would use that name. And so we went from her individual identity to a collective identity. So it's almost as if this initiation process, this process of brainwashing, whatever you want to call it, is a process of devaluing the individual for the collective, and which is almost the opposite of individuation. And this is part of the seduction process. One of the things that I wanted to mention that Mike and I talked about briefly is
Can I ask something about that? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and for me particularly, the concept of Martha as a self-identity. I'm not sure at the time that we go farthest back in the flashbacks in the films that even she has that as her own self-identity. It's almost as if it's her sister's identity of her, or her family's identity, or greater society's identity of her, and all of the victims seem to have in common a lack of self-identity, and that's what made them good targets.
Yes, absolutely. These are all fragile people with fragile egos and very shaky identities. I agree with that. I agree with that. And I think you mentioned something very interesting that I'm going to talk about. And if we look at this film almost as if it's a fairy tale, we can look at it from the standpoint of the sisters in this film. First of all, recollect the 2 sisters in the Bluebeard story. We can look at these 2 sisters almost as if they were the same person, components of the same person. So you have Lucy, the older sister, who leaves her family. We're not sure of the details of the family. They're just suggested in the film. We suspect that Martha was left behind after her parents were killed in some type of accident. She was shipped off to live with her aunt, which she was not happy about. And Lucy was at an age where she went off to college, and then she got married, and she went on with her life. So the suggestion is, if we look at this as a full story, and these characters are not necessarily just autonomous people, it's as if Martha comes back into Lucy's life as if Martha was left behind, almost as if a part of Lucy was left behind that she now must confront. Remember, the predator emerges in both story and in when we look at psychoanalysis. The predator emerges, particularly in times of change. If you remember when we talked about, I don't know if any of you had seen Black Swan. We did Black Swan last year. Mike, you might remember this. I talked a lot about the the Lilith mythology, Lilith being the first woman before Eve, never made it into the Bible, into the Old Testament, but there's a lot of mythology around her, and she embodies the vampirist, and one of the things that was interesting about her. So when we talk about the predator, we're not just talking about the masculine. She's a good version of the feminine, and she was known to emerge in times of transition. In fact, the stamping of the breaking of a glass at a wedding and bar mitzvah is to scare away Lilith. That's part of the mythology behind Lilith, and of course that's a time of transition. So the predator emerges in times in which we're moving towards a change in our lives, a new project, a new job, a new life, and we experience that. So we're going to talk more about that as we move on here.
Can I bring up something about the difference? Hey, Dan? There's something I want to bring up about that, the concept of the difference between the application as you're talking about it from dealing in the real world and the application of storytelling. Because for me, one of the most interesting elements of the story is that the sister seems to have her own set of flaws that make her also not quite having a full self-identity. And she relies a lot on her husband to fill in certain holes. And in the process of storytelling, one of the things that the film is obviously trying to do is to give you this parallel track. You know, one girl got on this track, and look what happened to her. One girl's on another track, and their lives are very different, but they share a mutual history. One of the problems in storytelling, however, is that I don't think that the sister's reactions to the obvious condition of Martha would have been as reserved and lack the inquisitiveness that this character has. So I think they had to put that in as an artifice. Do you agree with that?
I think so too, and I think it makes a statement. And I'm going to throw that out. Since you brought that, I'm going to throw this out there, and maybe we can talk more about it with the group with discussion. But this is my take on that. What they're trying to say is that both her sister Lucy and her husband could not see what was right in front of them, and what was right in front of them was not only a damaged, traumatized girl, but also the emergence of and presence of the predator. And I want to talk about that in terms of how in our society we seem so surprised by the emergence of the predator in the classroom that shoots down students, or the predator that stalks the predator, the sexual predator that stalks young people, which is right now very heavily in the news. And we seem to be surprised by it. We don't seem to have an eye for it, meaning we can't see it when it's right in front of us. We're easily seduced into believing that this person is safe and normal when the signs of the abuse or the predation are obvious to many people, but yet they do nothing about it. That phenomenon, I think, is very not exclusively American, but I think it's very American. What do you think about that?
I think there's I've had discussions with friends on this very topic when dealing with an individual who's in a self-destructive behavior. And you have to, as a friend or an acquaintance, decide, is this any of my business? At what point in time am I supposed to intercede, and how far am I supposed to go? So I think what we really have is a filtering system. It's not truly apathy, but it's a filtering system by which we separate ourselves from what we see as you know something's wrong. You know something's wrong, but it's not my business. And I think that's something you see a lot in times of economic duress when you have your own issues to deal with, that you become even more separating. You pull yourself away, and even though you know you see something that needs to be addressed, you feel it is not your responsibility. And then when it unfolds, you tell everybody gets together in hindsight, they put all together the pieces that they always knew. And by then it's too late because of the failure to act. And I don't want to make it a moral issue, because there is a certain morality to not getting involved with someone else's issues. But in this case, when it's family, I think it's different.
Yeah, I think the statement that Durkin is making is that our fascination with our addiction to the idyllic life, the American dream, the Eden on Earth, that was, I think, the typical, the couple in this film was the typical couple trying to find an idyllic spot on the lake, and they were trying to build their life. And what's interesting about this film, the underlying story, is that we find out partway through the film is that Lucy's trying to have a child. And again, from a storyline, it's very important, because we're talking about the emergence of the predator at a time when people are making changes in their life. So I don't think it's coincidental from a psychological standpoint that this whole predator story, this whole predation started to occur at a time in Lucy's life when she's starting a new life. However, her lack of being able to see what was right in front of her, and it's not that she didn't want to see it. She couldn't recognize it for what it was, which suggested that she had lost touch with her own instincts. If we compare that to the Bluebird story, at least the older sister in the Bluebird story had an instinct that the Bluebeard was not good. There was something wrong with that, and she didn't go along with Bluebeard.
I also think that you have an interesting duality to look at in this story as well, Dan, which is, since we're talking about the predator. I mean, obviously, we think of the cult and its leadership as collectively a predator. But I think that Martha, when she's alone with her sister, is also a predator, because she says comments like that imply, she always said it was no big deal, you had to do what you had to do, you were in college, and then she immediately follows that up with a comment like you're saying, whispering in the ear, suggesting, that it was a big deal and that you abandoned me and that you're going to be a terrible mother. These make her learning from being the victim of a predator. She's taken her skill set and now has become one, and is causing the spiral to get worse.
That's a very, very interesting observation. Yeah, she was so fragile that she could take on the projection of the predator. So she actually became the predator. So the predator was both outside her and within her, and sometimes she embodied that in her relationships with the husband as well. But the other thing I thought interesting was she goes from this farm, which started out as the idyllic Eden paradise, and turns sour, and then she goes to this more typical idyllic paradise, living with her sister. And there's a predation there, not only involving Martha, but also the husband, because what struck me, and I don't know if you remember this, he asked her when Lucy was gone, he asked her to go on the boat with him. And he asked her 3 times. 3 times she said no. And he kept insisting. That just struck me as odd for somebody that should have seen the fragility of this girl. So I'm thinking that Durkin had some suggestion here that perhaps the husband had some predatory instincts in which he wasn't in touch with, and that Not that he would have acted them out, but certainly it was part of the psychology.
I think that's the important point, is that he actually is the character who, does not act out. He sort of is the noble predator. He has the desire to find out more. He has a desire to get closer to her, to find out what is wrong in her background, but he does not go over. He has a code. He has a moral line he doesn't cross.
He is the code that most of us have.
Right.
Well, let's go on
but
to
still,
let's go on and talk about the seduction a little further, because there's some very specific things that are done as part of this seduction. And then kind of talk about what the forbidden room means. What does it signify? Jung had this concept that he used several times throughout his works that is conjured up by Piccola Estes, called the contra naturam, which is Latin and means against nature. And she uses this term in relation to the predator, the intrapsychic predator, because the intrapsychic predator works against nature. I think Kevin's a perfect example in the second film of working against Eva's nature. He's everything that she tried to do, he tried to destroy. And one of the important things here to note is that the forbidden room represents the dead parts of ourselves. So when we're talking about what do we leave behind, okay? Because we're talking about two women. If we look at Lucy in the first film and then Eva in the second film, two women that have left something behind that they haven't dealt with. There are weaknesses in both these characters that then are embodied through other characters. But what's left behind we can talk about in terms of the cut-off parts of ourselves that we experience as we grow up. And then this becomes our forbidden room as we have to delve into those parts of ourselves, particularly as people confront psychotherapy, and they might confront depression, panic disorder, and so forth at midlife. Very often there's a forbidden room that has to be opened up, and it involves what in Jungian language is called unlived life. That means the parts of ourselves that are dead are also unlived. And they either need to be addressed and dealt with and grieved over, or they need to be reanimated. And we'll talk about in the second film another story in which we'll talk about that reanimation. So we start out, when we talk about the seduction that Martha experiences on this farm, I think it's real important. If we ask the question, well, how did Martha get caught up in this? How did she get pulled there? I think Durkin's first film, which was a short film that he made while he was, in production of the feature film, that is called Mary Last Seen, is all about a young man and a young girl that are driving, and they stop at a gas station. You don't know where they're going. You know that they're a couple. She goes in the gas station. He goes into her purse and gets her cell phone, gets out of the car and throws the phone across the highway. So at that point, something's up. She gets back in the car, can't find the phone. He's telling her, forget about the phone. If you want the phone in a few days, I'll get you a phone. They're making their way towards this farm, which they end up going to, and he insists that she stay there and says that he's going to meet her later. When in fact, at the very end of the film, when she's taken in by this cult family, he leaves and gets back in his car and goes somewhere, supposedly to get another victim. So it goes back to what I was saying about this lover boy predation that this woman was teaching about. So what's so attractive to Martha is this farm presents itself, and this leader Patrick presents himself as idyllic, as living off the land, and there's something very very attractive about that. When we talk about the Jungian archetype of the puella or puer aeternus, the eternal girl or eternal boy, that's tied up in this fascination with this primal trust, the Garden of Eden, the mother-child bonding, and the inevitability, as we know from the story of the Garden of Eden, of betrayal. So let's go back to the older sister for a little bit. And this is what Este said, and this is very synchronistic, because what she was talking about was the older sister in Bluebeard. And so this is what she says. I'm trying to get this box out of the way so I can read it. The psychological story underlying the tale also applies to the older woman who has not yet completely learned to recognize the innate predator. So this applies to our story, I think. If we look at it from a particular standpoint, the story is fascinating on the scale that, first of all, Martha comes to her sister, and without knowing it, the underlying part of the story is to reclaim something that she left behind. And her sister welcomed it, to reclaim something she left behind, or to confront something she left behind. And then, of course, we find out that the predator has followed her to her sister's home. And the older sister then has to confront the predator as well. And this is what she says about the younger sister. The younger sister represents the creative potential within the psyche, something that is going toward the exuberant and fissioning life. Martha was the most vulnerable of the two and less worldly. She wasn't properly parented, so she was not seen or acknowledged. That made her vulnerable to Patrick's seduction. When we go back to Bluebeard's story, Bluebeard's feast is the first seduction. In other words, he wines and dines the sister, the younger sister, and she falls in love with him. The second seduction is the keys, where she gives the keys to the kingdom. You can have all the keys to the house. You can bring your family here. You could do whatever you want, which is a false sense of freedom. The predator offers unlimited freedom just before he hacks you up. The farm represented that for Martha. When we talk about the movie Kevin, we'll talk about a different kind of seduction, but I think it's there as well. So when we get to the end of the film, we're getting a sense. Martha's breaking down. The film reminds us of the black swan. We're not sure what's real. We're not sure what Martha is really experiencing versus a delusion or hallucination. And but we suspect it's real. And because there's no resolution, and if we look at the final frame, I'll come back to these. If we look at the final frame, what I call the psychic stain, and the final scene is that her sister decides that Martha needs help. Martha decides she needs help, and they're going off to a psychiatric hospital or something. And one of the young men from the cult is standing in front of the car, stops them, and surprises them and scares them. And Martha looks back, and she knows that the predator is following, and that's where the movie ends. And what this forces us to do from a movie standpoint, from a story standpoint, because there's no resolution of that, it forces us to be introspective. It forces us to look in. And if we take the time to do that, I think it's worthwhile. And much of our discussion tonight is really taking a look at what we felt and what we experienced and kind of amplifying it and opening it up. Let me go back to some of these other, talked about that. One of the other seductions in the film, which is really paradoxical, and I think is one of the many paradoxes that Patrick embodies. He sings a song to her after he rapes her the night before. Sings a song to her that it's called "She's Just a Picture," and singing to her, directly to her, looking at her, and she's kind of taking it in and is lavished with attention, and she kind of loves it. But if you listen to the words, which you guess that she's not listening to, what the words are saying in that song is that she's nothing. She's just a picture. She's not a real person. Another seduction in the film is this power over life and death. His true predator nature is starting to emerge at this point when he orders one of the cult members to kill an animal. One of the things I want to talk about when we talk about films, kind of just backing off and talk about films, I want to talk about Hillman's discussion of betrayal in an essay called Betrayal. And he said basically there are the potential negative reactions that we can have to experiencing betrayal in our lives can be escalated from starting with revenge up to paranoia. And I kind of added some films to that. And some of the characters in these films embody that. So if you think about revenge, you might think about True Grit. You can also think about The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo as her response to betrayal. Denial is a film called The Crush. Cynicism, we could talk about a film called Sleeping Beauty that came out last year. Another predatory film, but very different. A film by Julia Lee, directed and written by her, but about cynicism. The predator in that film is the cynic. And then, of course, Kevin, who also embodies the cynic. Self-betrayal is the next level, and that I think we have here with Marcy May Marlene. And paranoia, I think, was demonstrated as a response to betrayal in The Black Swan. Okay, just a couple things, and then we'll break. Trust and betrayal. These are a couple quotes, one from Hillman and one from Jung. When we talk about the response to betrayal, it's almost as if we can look at these two films as characters, adult characters that are catching up with their lives. It only appears as life's catching up with them. So you have these outer circumstances in which they confront their deepest complex, their core complex. For the first woman, for Lucy, if we look at Lucy and Martha as kind of parts of the same psyche, what she had to confront was part of her complex was this confrontation of motherhood. The guilt that she experienced over leaving Martha, which I think was evident in the dialogue in the film, she had left behind and had not dealt with, and now that she's trying to have a child, this is all coming to her to have to deal with. that goes back to our concept of the contra naturam, confronting what's against nature. That's also what happens when we confront our own complexes. So this is what Hillman says about betrayal. Neither trust nor forgiveness can be fully realized without betrayal. So if we were to look past these films and look in these people's lives and look at these stories as processes for individuation, apart from the pathology that they present, but just as stories as people with this background of the drama. But if we look at them as stories of individuation, it's a movement away from betrayal, a confrontation of betrayal, to forgiveness. And in order to do that, and I think what's evident in the second film is what Jung says what we have to do, and he says this in his book Psychology and Alchemy. And what he says is the patient must be alone if he is to find out what it is that supports him when he can no longer support himself. Only this experience can give him an indestructible foundation. Now, when we talk about Kevin, we're going to talk about a woman who must find out what supports her by being alone, entirely alone. And this is part of her journey. But let's plan on talking about that after our break. Do we want to have a discussion first or break?
Let's go ahead. We probably won't have a formal break, Dan.
Okay.
But by break, why don't we ask some questions for folks? We'll
Good.
open up to some pieces. Since everybody's on computer anyway, they can break whenever they want if they need to
That's right.
do so.
Okay.
Gosh, by the way, my name's Steve Buser. Myself and Len Cruz are the two founders of Asheville Young Center. Len's on the line as well. I'm not sure if he's at a place where he'll be jumping in or not, but I know he's participating today. And the five of us are kind of co-hosts, with Dan, Mike, and Ryan. Boy, Dan, I just want to say this is some marvelous material that you've been presenting tonight. I just really enjoy the way you're pulling these films and archetypal themes and forces together. And Mike as well, your comments very insightful from both the film director, and I swear you're a closet Jungian with a lot of intra-psychological abilities.
He really is.
So anyway, for the
Steve,
question,
since you
go ahead.
I got a question for both of you as Jungians. All right, when you talked about neurobiology and the way the brain works, one of the questions I have as a storyteller, as a filmmaker, is that I see this common theme amongst predator films and any kind of film where they want to leave you in a state of suspense when you already know an end result. And that's the heavy use of juxtaposition. So both of these films utilize telling stories out of time and out of order. Harold Pinter did it well. It goes all the way back. It's a form of storytelling where you have to assume a gap, and then they tell you what actually happened in the gap. And I'm wondering how this engages your brain when you're told stories out of order, and if that has an effect on heightening the sensation of being the stalked person.
That's a wonderful question. Do you want to take that, Dan?
It is, but I want to hear your comments. I really, because I thought a lot about this, and this is what works with these films. I think, first of all, there is a seduction that goes on that we're not aware of. In other words, we're seduced into the film. Because had each of these films started out, if Martha started out like a Charles Manson film, where we knew what was coming up front, we would not have emotionally allowed ourselves to be vulnerable. And there's just a hint of that going on, but we don't find out later the hint of a Charles Manson family type thing going on until later in the film after we've already been pulled in. So we're seduced along with Martha. And I think in the second film, the seduction is less obvious, but I think the seduction is our desire for normalcy. And I think we identify with Eva from the very beginning that all she wants is a normal life with with a normal kid. And I think that drive for that desire for that, keeps us engaged, and we keep hoping that she can engage this child, because our sense is that this is where we experience the contra naturam. What we experience with her relationship with her son is against our nature, and we desire that to be resolved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much.
You're saying then that a character, in terms of an audience watching a participatory thing like a film, the reason you can connect to the character is highlighted by this not telling you the story in a linear fashion, that the use of juxtaposition and filling in the blanks makes you more sympathetic on a brain level, that it's an effect. Is that correct?
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking we engage on a feeling level, and it doesn't activate our, I'm going to talk about it later, it doesn't activate our limbic system so that we're defended before the film starts. If these films were made differently, if, for example, the film starts out and we know that Kevin's going to kill all these people, I think we would be more defended and less emotionally attached to the mother. I think the way it was designed, we were more emotionally empathetic with the mother.
I find it interesting that amongst the people who don't care for the film, and this is very much, we talked about this earlier, this is very much the kind of film where you should be careful who you show it to, and it's a love-hate kind of film. You're not going to find a lot of people go, you're either going to love it or you're going to think, what the heck was that? And amongst the people who are in the what the heck was that group are the ones who find that it's not following the Western dictums of having a beginning, a middle, and an end, makes it so that by the time you're done, you're unresolved, and that's why they don't like it. Do you have any comment on that?
Steve, what do you think?
Well, I was just going to say that the asynchronous timeline is pretty masterful and powerfully executed, because I think it really does pull you in almost neurobiologically, as Mike is suggesting, because it's so disjointed, confused, and there's a bit of a detective piecing together, and aha, that's what's there, and I think that, and it's very similar to a traumatic event. I'm thinking about war experiences and trauma early on. I mean, if you're in a war zone, you're getting bombarded by 1,000 different stimuli simultaneous, some of which are overwhelming, blood, gore, self-protection, valor, all these kinds of things going back and forth. And it makes it so powerful because it's chopped up and fuzzy and kind of comes together. And so you almost feel like you've been dragged through a war experience as you're watching these movies, because you've been so on edge trying to piece this together and make sense of what really ultimately can't make sense. It's too outside of reality for most people to make sense, but yet you have to, and you're confronted with it.
You're going back to the right brain, left brain. If a movie is linear, it activates our left brain. We're looking for the logic of it. We're kind of engaged from a rational point of view. The way that these movies are designed, it doesn't allow you to do that. I think, just as you said, it engages us on an emotional level. And when we're talking about right brain stuff, we're talking about emotional memory. So we kind of suspend our need for logic and move into the right brain, where all the good stuff is, all the emotional stuff, the good, the positive stuff, and the negative stuff. So I think
let me shift a bit. I want to engage our audience a little bit.
Okay.
We're going to have a poll at some point, which we may be kind of getting ready for if Ryan's got that. But first, I want to open up some questions. There's two ways of asking questions or giving comments today. One is typing out the question, and a number of folks, 5 or 7, have already typed out some questions and sent them to us. That's the most common. Feel free to do that. The braver way is to push the little button that says raise your hand, and one person has already clicked that button. And we'll try a little bit to see if we can unmute the microphones for those that have raised hand. And as long as you turn down your speakers, which is very important on your computer, you'll be able to ask a question. And there's one person I'll be opening up their mic in a little bit just to see if we can get that system working. I do want to ask a few of the questions kind of here. First of all, this is more of a comment, but it's, I lost it. Somewhere said, what about the orange pen that's flicking around? So Dan, somebody's just pointing out there was an orange pen that was marking up the screen.
Oh, that's me. I'm playing again.
Okay, feel free to play, but some people like and some don't like that.
Apparently it's distracting.
Yep. Oh, and the one person clicked there, raise their hand, so they no longer have their hand raised. But if you want to ask a verbal question, click the raise your hand button, and we'll do that. Let me read some of these comments. There are a lot here, and I'll just throw a few of them out. Not a question, but a comment. This is from Jessica out there. Marcy May was the name that Martha told Patrick was her grandmother's name. The predator went right to the maternal, and Martha was pleased with identification. Any thoughts with that, Dan?
Another seduction. Yeah, I had forgotten about that, but that's right. He
wait a minute, guys. I think that's yeah, but she didn't mention it to him first. He named her, and then she said, "Oh, that was my grandmother's name," and then he really ran with it. But
you're right.
She didn't mention the grandmother's name prior to him naming her.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, he took her identity first.
But it served to enhance the seduction. Whether
Absolutely.
it was synchronistic or how he knew that, but she took it as a positive sign to move forward.
Yes, and it's a common tactic, even in politics, even in when you're dealing with large groups, that someone who wants to express their sense of authority over the group as a whole will often come up with the clever nickname or the alternative name that becomes your name, so they have effectively named you. And in a way, they're establishing a pecking order and defining you, whether you like it or not. So it's also, it firmly establishes that he thinks about her, there's your seductive part, and he's in charge here, and that's another seductive part.
Let me move to audio question. I'm going to see if this will work. Janice Flanders, put her hand down. Hands back up. I'm going to unmute your microphone. And Janice, make sure to turn your speakers down, and let's see if we can get your audio working. So Janice, can you hear us? Your
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Thank you.
Okay. Do you think the external predator, the psychopath or the sociopath, is attracted to individuals or can sense individuals that are wounded or possibly have not addressed their own internal predator or their inner
Yes.
Okay.
Jessica, is that your name?
Janice,
I'm sorry. Janice, I think that's you're right on with that. Because the predator archetype and the naivete archetype,
yes.
the puella or the puer, are tied together. It's almost as if the predator emerges to devour the naive parts of ourselves.
Yes.
And I think that's evident in both films. When we talk about Kevin, will talk about what is naive about Eva that Kevin emerges. But I think in the outer world, I think you're absolutely right. I think predators instinctively can smell out naive people or the naive natures of people, and they go after it.
I think it's also strongly enforced by the facts in law enforcement cases, because when you talk about predators, those who prey on trying to snatch a child or trying to isolate someone, usually when they are caught, it's because of a stronger personality that actually broke away and reported, and action occurs because of it. So I think that they instinctively know as well, maybe not even instinctively know, maybe rationally know that they have to pick a target that can be easily obtained. And if they make a mistake in that measurement, that's how they're going to get caught.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
I've just wondered about that and the thought about the blessed wound. And I personally have experienced a really horrible individual, a really a vicious predator in my life. And he now, he's dancing away, is avoiding it as much as possible, being around, and then just continuing to pursue other naive, innocent, or, I think Clarissa Piccola said, wherever there's naivete, beauty, or innocence, the predator's there. So, in a way, I hope to try to defer that, or just, help that individual, but there's only so much you can do because they are hell-bent on not,
yes.
they, I guess maybe their own psyche is wanting to address this, I suppose.
Yes.
So it's a moral issue, and yet you can only do so much, and it's disconcerting. It's just really hard to figure out what to do.
Yes, and there tends, we tend to breed naive people. We tend to emerge from, particularly our culture, very naive. I think there's American culture is unique in that we're all raised as puers and puellas, with naive natures that are susceptible to predation, and it's as if we don't do a good job of teaching our children that, and I think part of that, and this is my premise. If we look at this historically, we moved from a more balanced way of thinking somewhere in the 17th, 18th century to a primary left brain thinking in which we're infatuated with science and reason and all that got us the great creature comforts, and we've somehow ignored the more primitive hemisphere of our brain, which is the right brain, that houses all the good stuff. And I think from a psychoanalytic point of view, Jung identified this and tried to rectify it with his work and psychoanalysis in general. But I think particularly Jung got it right on. So it's as if, and people that go into psychotherapy and psychotherapists experience this movement into the right hemisphere is a movement not only into the past but into the accumulated emotional memory and implicit memory, meaning unconscious memory that we're talking about. And if we don't make that journey, we run the risk of not being able to identify predators. And Clarissa Piccola Estes talks about how, and she refers to wolves, obviously through the book, because she uses them. They are a role model from the sense that the mother wolf will teach the cub these instincts to be able to sort out the relationships, the good relationships from the destructive ones, and it's almost as if we've gotten away from being able to teach that or knowing how to teach it.
Can I ask Janice
Does
a
that make
question?
sense? Yeah.
Let me just interject for a second. First of all, Janice, thank you so much for your question. That it really was nice and was able to give us some real insights and further discussion. Do feel free, anybody else that wants to ask a question. We might have time for one more audio one before we get going. Just click the raise your hand button under the attendee list there on your dashboard. The 2 polls just came out. Hopefully people saw those as well. 77% voted for nature versus nurture. It wasn't quite a fair poll because really both ought to be up there. There were a couple of comments that came to us of why don't you have both? But we really wanted to force people into kind of weighing one way or the other. And really that goes to I think the next film a lot of to what degree was Kevin the way he was from genetics and birth, or to what degree was it the kind of environment with that. But thank you all for voting kind of on those polls as well. Go ahead, Mike. You had a comment? And we'll
Janice, are you still there?
Question. Yeah, go ahead. Oh,
I had a question.
For Janice?
Yeah, directly for Janice. Are you there, Janice?
I will open. Yep, I just got her mic open.
Yes,
go ahead, Mike.
I'm there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Here's my question to you now. Removing all of the purpose of the seminar out of your mind, and just as a person who has had the experiences you have, did you find the film, did you find either of these films enjoyable or disturbing? Would you recommend them? Would you tell your friends to see them?
Well, I think, like you said, it gives you this psychic, it's a bit of a, it's almost like once I had experienced this predator and got him out of my life, I almost went through a period of like post-traumatic.
PTSD?
Yes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And just seeing the cold, I only saw clips of the We Need to Talk About Kevin, and just the cold-heartedness in this child. It just, it kind of hit those same places that it just is, it's, a fairy tale is a lot easier to take, but it isn't necessarily going to be held as to be true, nor are these stories, but
well, they are
it's
stories.
really important to impart this kind of information to young adults and even children, that there are people that don't live, they're not necessarily always caring people.
So for you, you wouldn't hesitate then? You would, even a younger person, you'd be okay with them seeing this?
No, I wouldn't really want a child to watch this violent movie. I mean, parts of it I could see that it was leading to a violent movie. I don't know. But, I mean, it said it was a mass shootout or something at the,
nothing is seen of that, by the way.
Oh, okay.
You know that he does it, and you see
no,
him.
it's really, it's an adult movie. It's not really something for children to see. But there is a definitely need for children to be leery and for parents to understand, just that communication about other people, and that people aren't always nice. And
so to your adult friends, then, would you say, you got to see this film?
Well, yeah, I actually have a friend, and I said, I'm not sure you really want to see this, but I really want to see it.
It's a powerful question. There's a lot to that. Boy, thank you so much
thank you.
For all these comments. We've got a long list of questions that are coming in now. We're not going to be able to get to all of them now. What I think we'd like to do, since time is moving ahead, Dan, are you ready to go ahead and talk about the second material? And then we'll open for discussion. If people want to stay a little bit later, we may end up going past 10. I don't know. I should ask Dan first if he's able to, as well as Mike. But anybody who wants to go a little bit beyond, we want to be able to hold the lines open a little bit longer, and because there's already so much discussion out there. So if anybody, the presenters included,
I'm good at answering.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good. Yeah.
So we'll go a little bit beyond 10 Eastern Time. Not too much more, but we'll try to extend a little bit. But why don't you go ahead? I'll close mics, and we'll hold questions for now, but we'll get back to some of these fabulous comments and questions that are really streaming in now. But go ahead, Dan. The floor is back to you.
Okay, I'm going to talk about this film, and we can certainly talk about it from many different points of view, particularly the the confrontation of this psychopathy in children. There was a New York Times article that came out a few weeks ago. If you Google the title, "Can a 9-year-old be a psychopath?" It's a wonderful article about a psychologist that's researching psychopathy and sociopathy in children. It's coming up some very interesting things. But one of the things that really stands out is the fact that we don't know the cause of sociopathy in children. It's a strange thing. We do know a lot about the neurobiology of relationship and the importance of right brain development in the attachment between the mother and the child, that emotional resonance between the mother and child actually begins in the 3rd trimester and goes for 18 months, beyond 18 months. But their first 18 months is crucial for the proper development of the brain and development of the ability for the child as it grows up to have appropriate and meaningful and need-fulfilling relationships. And if during that time there's trauma, abuse, neglect, that can retard that process. And actually they found physical damage, destruction of cells in particular areas of the brain that then is difficult and as the person grows up to manage, and is one of the causes of mental illness. So we don't have an answer. I think the best answer regarding nurture versus nature is both. But the film does an interesting job of providing evidence, and the book, by the way, which I highly recommend, has much more of Eva's personality, because it's written from her point of view in letters to Franklin, who you don't find out until, of course, the end of the book that he's one of the victims. But this is after the catastrophe that she's putting her life back together, and there's a lot about her ambivalence about motherhood, her ambivalence about having a child, her ambivalence about her relationship with Kevin in particular, and her cynicism towards motherhood, the American Pie, everything commercial. She has a very cynical outlook on things, and her business, what she does for a living, is she goes around the world, particularly prior to her marriage to Franklin. She flies around the world. She's a wonderful example of a Puella who is not grounded and loves to is more at home in Africa, being amongst tribal people, rather than being in America. And she writes travel books, and she became very famous and very wealthy doing that. So marriage to her and having a child is bringing the Puella, her Puella nature down to earth, and it's her confronting her complex, which is all the cynicism that she did not deal with growing up. We don't know much about
Dan?
Yes.
Dan, you're referring in this specifically to the book, right? Because a lot of what you're talking about was not developed, and probably should have been, in the film.
It's not. It's not in the film. It is more in the book. You don't get a sense from the film that she's cynical at all, or maybe hints of it.
No, in fact, the film goes, in my opinion.
Go on.
she's cynical about overweight people, but you don't seem to see her. She's in fact portrayed the opposite, that she's very caring, very nurturing, and even as a baby, this child had nothing, did not like her. To make it even more frustrating to every parent out there who does all the right things and has a troubled child. I think it was very, very wide brush painted that way.
Yeah.
I think the book that you're describing would have actually been a better film.
And I think it's interesting that Lynn Ramsey, the director, also wrote the script, and she took the parts of the book. Although Lionel Shriver, the writer of the book, endorsed the film, I just found I found the amount of cynicism that and it's a witty cynicism. She's very witty, very articulate. It's a very very appealing narrative. It's a wonderful book to read, and you get a sense of humor that you don't get out in the film. The film is very heavy, very dark, and you don't get any of that that you would get in the book. But what did strike me was it seems a perfect balance, if you look at it from a psychoanalytic point of view, that Kevin would emerge from this unaddressed cynicism. It's almost as if the cynicism that lies in shadow for her came out of her, and she had to deal with it. Now, the other component that's in the film, that's also in the book, and I think beautifully done imagistically in the film, is this reaction to the blood or the paint, red paint that's thrown on her house. And what happens in the film, if you can catch the sequence of the film, because it's kind of all over the place, is after the event, after Kevin kills all these people with a bow and arrow, which is a very interesting use of a weapon that we could talk about. Her life completely is turned upside down. She loses her job. She loses her public image. She can't get a job. She loses her house. She loses everything. She's sued in court by multiple victims, and she ends up living in this small shack of a house. And one night, it's somebody throws paint on the house, red paint, and on the windows, on the frame, and so throughout the movie, you see her scraping, sanding, and trying to get this paint off. You ask yourself, well, why is she doing this? Why don't she just leave? But that image and that process of scraping and cleaning and preparing that house is, to me, the psychological equivalent of her coming to terms with her very enmeshed relationship with Kevin. And the enmeshment is kind of paradoxical, because she didn't engage with them emotionally. They weren't engaged emotionally. They were completely unattached to each other emotionally. But at the same time, there are elements, and I think it was shown in images, of their parallel. And this picture that I'm showing is a good example of their parallel existence, and how he, as much as he tried to destroy everything that she loved, he copied her. And I think there's a few scenes in the film in which there was this parallel existence between the two of them, where they shared these secret things. And I forgot where I was going with that. But I think Kevin comes to represent the contra naturam that we were talking about, and the intrapsychic predator. And if we look at that and talk about it from that point of view, we can also talk about the psychopath, the sociopathic child out there, and how does that happen. But I want to talk about this in terms as if this film was a fairy tale, and these characters were all components of the same psyche, just as we did Martha, because I think each character in this film is really a component of Eva's psyche. Even if we look at the name Eva, referencing Eve, and the Garden of Eden. We go back to the discussion we had about the puella and the puella nature of living in La La Land, living in Eden, living in paradise, and this strong attraction that we have, or this nature, this part of us has towards this primal trust. Okay, being in the womb. There's an element of that, and of course Eva was in her element when she was flying above the world, and of course it was her complex for her to come crashing down by having this child. I want to talk about another version of Bluebeard real quickly, and I'll give you some of the differences in it. But I think it's an important story. It's another Grimm's fairy tale, and we might as well talk a little bit about, well, how do these stories come about? There's many different versions of Bluebeard, and they're all different. They all have their own different take on a story, but it's amazing how these stories traveled around Europe and eventually were captured. But this story is a little different, and it's going to speak more to our current film. It's about a sorcerer that pretends to be a week-old man, and he goes to the house next door, and the first person that opens the door is the eldest daughter. And the eldest daughter, he asks her for some food. He says that he's hungry. She feels sorry for him. She goes to get some food. The minute he touches her, she automatically loses her power, and she is placed into this basket that he's carrying. He carries her home and invites her into his mansion, and just like Bluebeard says, okay, I'm going to give you the keys to the mansion while I'm away, and here is a key and an egg. So the difference here, one of the details in this story, he gives her the key to the forbidden room, plus all the keys to the house, and an egg. And he says to her, whatever you do, don't go into the room that this key is to, and don't let anything happen to this egg that I give you. And of course, she's going to go into the room after he leaves, and when he comes back and realizes that she went into the room, he chops her up. There's in the room, when she goes in there is blood in a big basin, and there are dead body parts, and there is an axe. And when he discovers what she did, he chops her up, and he goes back to the house with his basket. The next sister comes, and he presents himself as a poor, old, starving man, and she goes to get food, and she's whisked away to the house and dismembered the same way. Now, the third daughter is the youngest daughter, which is interesting. It's the opposite of Bluebeard. So it's the youngest daughter that he then, same thing happens, he brings to the house. But what's interesting about the youngest daughter is she takes the egg. Now, for each of the other sisters, they drop the egg in the bloody room. The egg is stained, and that's how he figures out that they've been in the room. But this sister is smart. She hides the egg in a drawer. She goes into the room. She realizes her dead sisters have been dismembered, and she takes their bodies and aligns their dismembered parts in such a way as they come together, and they become animated, and she realizes that the sorcerer is coming back. She hides her sisters now in a room, and she contrives a scheme to deal with the sorcerer. When the sorcerer comes back, something very interesting happens. The sorcerer asks to see the egg. She shows him the egg that's unstained, and he announces to her that she accomplished the task. She met the challenge, and now she can have anything she wants. So the power shifts. You see the power of the predator when all he had to do was to touch the young woman, the maiden, in the house to get her to go in the basket. And the power shifts after she has confronted the forbidden room. And then the rest of the story goes on where she sends him to her parents' house with the basket, and she has hidden her sisters in that basket, but tells him that this is the gold for her dowry and that he is to bring to the parents. So unwittingly, he brings the sisters that have been reanimated back home. By the time he gets back, she has set up a scheme in which she has placed a skull with all kinds of ornamentation in the window of the house on the second floor, and says that your bride is upstairs waiting for you. And he goes with all his minions into the house, and she sets the house on fire and burns the sorcerer. And then she lives happy ever after, having acquiring all his wealth. So what's the differences in this story? Well, first of all, the symbol of the egg is the symbol of the archetypal self. What's interesting about this predator is that he, first of all, as well as Bluebeard, he not only provides the key to the forbidden room, but in this case, he gives her the opportunity to protect herself. In other words, the archetypal self, the symbol of the egg, requires that when we confront the forbidden room, when we confront in our own natures the predator, we have to be mindful of and take care of our archetypal self. The danger is that we don't, and we lose ourselves to this dangerous archetypal realm, and lose ourselves to the predator himself. I want to switch gears a little bit. And I want to talk about Donald Kelshed, because we're talking about something very similar when we talk about his self-care system. And this comes from his magnificent psychoanalytic work about trauma called The Inner World of Trauma. And he describes a system, a psychic system in us in which archetypally a protector/persecutor emerges, particularly in our midlives. This is a time that we all seek psychotherapy, those of us that seek psychotherapy. This is the time of transition. This is the midlife crisis, where any trauma in our lives, and he talks specifically about trauma, but the persecutor-protector emerges and is, he actually does a good job of symbolizing this, so you can identify with it. When we talk about the Rapunzel story of Grimm's fairy tale of Rapunzel, where Rapunzel is promised unwittingly by his parents to be taken by the enchantress that lives next door. The enchantress then takes her, says that she's going to take care of her as if she were her own, and when she turns 12 years old, she puts her up in a tower that nobody can get to. The only way into the tower is the enchantress tells her to lower her very long hair, and she can climb up. So the protector it very symbolically locks us in this tower, and very quickly turns to the persecutor because they don't want us to move out of this, what he calls a self-care system. And we see this with trauma victims, but we see this with patients of layers of trauma, of differing degrees of trauma, in which they get caught up in a system in which any movement, any growth is crushed by this persecutor, or as we've been talking about, the predator. That means every new idea, new job, an idea for a new career, a new life, a new boyfriend, a new spouse, a new something new. This movement is met with the emergence of this persecutor that is that is constantly trying to whisper in your ear that you're no good, you can't do it, and you're not going to do it. And we confront this quite a bit in the context of psychotherapy, where this voice emerges. We try to isolate that voice, and help the client come to terms with it, but at the same time, in the context of the relationship with the client, we carry, the therapist then carries for their patient the fear of the predator and the knowledge of this predator, and also is able to give information back that says that there are other voices that are positive that need to offset the voice of this persecutor. So the self-care system is made up of the child/client and this persecutor and protector. I want to talk about a case study in particular where all of these things emerged. This is a woman in her mid-30s, and the change in her life occurred when she developed an intimate relationship with a man. Prior to this, her relationships with men were as victim and predator. Her relationships were primarily with men that were abusive, and as she was growing and moving out of these abusive relationships, she was slowly changing, because the other component of the abuser, of course, we know, is that they can very quickly in turn become the protector. So it's almost as if these men embody both the persecutor and protector in flesh. But what was different was she moved from these abusive men to this very kind and gentle and loving man. And what was very interesting was that, and what caused her to come to psychotherapy was that the abuser, the predator, the persecutor, emerged within her and was manifested in her relationship with this person. So it was almost as if she was sabotaging this relationship, and she struggled with what was happening and didn't understand it, but was emotionally abandoned to this process that was going on, until we started to sort out what was happening. So her symptoms were periods of depression, panic episodes, and difficulties with her primary relationships. So how did this manifest in her dreams, which I think is very interesting when we talk about how dreams are reflective of this process. Her dreams started out as being successive dreams of various versions of the predator. The first dream that she presented, and this is really in the beginning of the course of psychotherapy, the first dream she presented was of a serial killer that was chasing her in an old mansion, old abandoned mansion, many, many rooms. It sounds similar to the Bluebeard story, a huge house. And she was chased throughout this until witnesses him murdering a girl in the dream. And then he turns to her and is about to kill her, and she kills him instead. The next dream is a vampire dream in which a vampire is chasing her, and she dispatches him very similarly. She has a couple of other predatory dreams too, different time periods, different clothes, different gender, but all with this similar of this character in the dream trying to kill her. And then something is happening, because what's happening in her outer life during this time is she she is trying to move into doing something different with her life from a standpoint of artistic and occupation. She has always sewed, but she wanted to move into making clothes and doing something a little more artistic, a little beyond what she's her comfort level. And this is when the predators started to emerge to sabotage her, to tell her that she couldn't do it. She would come across aspects of the clothing that were intimidating to her, and then she would stop working on it. At the same time, she was struggling with her family, making demands on her time, and she it was used to sacrificing herself for the family. At any given moment that she would be called upon to go babysit or help clean something or something, and this was eating into her time sewing and doing things that were important to her. So here we have this conflict, and then she started negotiating with these people for more time and confronting them and saying, I need time to be myself. I need time to do this. And what was interesting in her dreams at that point, and this was 6 to 7 months into therapy, her dreams started to change, and the predator dreams started to change. And the very next predator dream that she has at that point is involves a medieval setting in which she is in the midst of a battle, knights battling. She leaves that setting to go to a clearing to be by herself, a beautiful clearing that is sunny and very warm. And one of the knights leaves the melee and comes to attack her. And he's dressed like Michael Myers with a ski mask. I don't know how that happened in the context of medieval times, but it's her dream. What she does is she stops him and she asks him, "Why are you trying to kill me?" And he stops dead in his tracks. And she keeps negotiating with him. "Why are you doing this? You don't need to do this." And he eventually stops. He takes off his mask, revealing a very handsome, long blonde-haired young man who tells her that he was ordered to do it by somebody higher than him. And the very next dream she had after that was a very similar dream involving an Asian killer, hitman. Very similar, stopped him before he was going to kill her and negotiated with him. Those dreams indicate a movement for her away from dealing with the intrapsychic predator simply by killing it, which is like a compensatory dream, by changing that to actually negotiating with it, confronting it, and so forth. So, and she was doing that in her life, and it came out and was revealed in her dreams. And what's interesting is, from a symptomatic standpoint, her symptoms started to lift. She developed a great deal of less episodes of anxiety and panic. She was gaining control over her own affect, which is the process of coming to terms with the right brain and all of the activation that goes on when we start exploring the emotional memory that's housed there. Okay, let's go on to our movie and finish up with that. So I started out talking about Eva as this wonderful depiction of a Puella who flew around the world. This is a great image of just the paradox in their life. Here you have them waiting. If you remember the film when this occurred, they're waiting to hear about their daughter, who Kevin has poured Drano in her eye, and she's lost her eye and she's in surgery, and they're waiting to hear, and they're distraught and so forth. And here you have this image with this happy face on this balloon in the background. And I think there's similar images like that throughout the film, where you have this paradox of the heavy weightiness of the traumatic and dramatic experience with this psychopathic kid. We talked earlier about how these films tend to be more successful overseas, and I think maybe we could talk about it more in discussion, Mike, if you can remember us to do that, because I do want to talk about how American films are different, and how American moviegoers are different, particularly around this idea of the puella puella nature, the amount of movies that are heroic in nature, that have a very more linear storyline, and there's good and evil, black and white, and how we don't do well with films that are gray, films that are left unresolved, and so forth. I think that's important for us to understand.
Yeah, there's a fundamental problems with that kind of, this in particular, this film, it was a European film, and it's sort of taking an American story and it's putting in a European. I look at it as a film about how Europeans think it would have happened in America. I don't think they think of it as a domestic story.
And I didn't take that away, and I'll tell you why. What I took away is that it first of all, it got traction in Europe. You're absolutely right. It actually was a BBC radio drama before it became a film, before Lynn Ramsey picked it up as a film, and again, it was made in Europe, I think, by the BBC. But this is my take on it. I think it was picked up because the unconscious material and movies that are not typical American film, those types of stories, darker stories, I think are more accessible to a European sensibility. This film did very well at Cannes Film Festival, and it really hasn't gotten any traction in the United States. So I think
I also blame the marketers, because when they got this film, they didn't promote it as an exploration of a psychological relationship or anything like what it really is. It was marketed as a horror film.
Okay.
And I think a lot of people who went to see a horror film were severely disappointed, and word of mouth in America is a major factor towards how many people show up the next week. Also, we have to deal with the fact that by the time this film is an American release, you've lost a significant amount of your audience to piracy. People may have seen it, they just didn't pay to see it. So those are two factors why I think you see the decline in the American audience, is it was marketed to completely the wrong audience.
Okay.
And also, it didn't address what the story was about.
Okay. And I think that's typical with some of the films that we've talked about. Some of the films over the last couple of years, I think are just are not marketed correctly. So it's a real good point. I want to talk about the archetype of the trickster, because I think both Patrick and Kevin do embody this. If we look at this from an archetypal standpoint, and what we're talking about are the gods of Mercurius, Hermes, and there's another little story that I'm going to throw out there regarding this trickster that I think will help put this component in light. And it's another Grimm's fairy tale, simply about the god Mercurius, and a young woodcutter goes off into the woods and hears this voice at the base of an oak tree, and digs up at the roots and finds this bottle. And in the bottle is what looks like a frog, that is yelling to get out of the bottle and is asking, please, please let me out. And the woodcutter uncorks the bottle, and of course out comes the god Mercurius, and he grows huge. And the first thing he says to the woodcutter is, thank you for letting me out of the bottle. Your reward is that you're going to die. I'm going to kill you. And the woodcutter thinks very quickly and says, well, how do I know you are who you are? Prove it to me by making yourself small and going back into the bottle. And Mercurius is offended by that and says, of course I can do it, and I'll show you. He goes back into the bottle, and of course the woodcutter closes the bottle with the cork, and Mercurius is bottled up again. So after that, Mercurius pleads for his release again, only this time it's different because the shift, the power has changed. When Mercurius first came out, the power was in his favor. And now the power is in the favor of the woodcutter, and the Mercurius offers him a gift when he is released, and the gift is a magic plaster that, when put to anything that's damaged, instantly heals it. So the woodcutter goes off with this magic plaster and becomes a famous physician and becomes wealthy and lives ever happily ever after. I think what's important for this story, and Jung writes about this story and writes a great deal about Mercurius, particularly coming from alchemy. One of the common components of the alchemical text was Mercurius, but it's this dual nature of both of good and bad, of being diabolical, and demonstrated in the story that at first he's going to kill him, and then he turns around and offers him this amazing gift. So how does that relate to these characters in these films? Well, if you look at it from the standpoint of the primary characters, which for me, again, from a psychological standpoint, is Lucy in the more adult in the first film, and Eva in the second film. That these are both the journeys for them in confronting the trickster in their lives, and the trickster can be both destructive and creative. Not that Kevin was literally creative, because he was all embodied in destruction, but that through this process, and what I mentioned before was this scraping of the paint that was shown in various scenes throughout the film, was symbolic of Eva's coming to terms with her separateness from Kevin. All the feelings of guilt, of feeling responsible, all of that needed to be confronted for her to go on with her life. And it's at the very end of the film that she does something very interesting. First of all, if you remember the house, after she scraped all the paint off, she builds she makes a room for Kevin in this house. It's almost as if it's a shrine. And one of the things that Clarissa Pinkola Estes says that we have to do with this intrapsychic predator is we have to contain it. It never goes away, but we have to find a room for it and be able to contain it. And what I found in the storyline of this movie is that that's exactly what she does. She makes a room for Kevin, and it's one of the final things she does, and she leaves the house supposedly for good, as if finding a place for him, for this predator, so that she could come to terms with it. But the very last scene is interesting. She goes to see him in prison. He's about to be sent. He's 18. He's about to be sent to a penitentiary, the Sing Sing. And she asks him the question we all want to ask: why did you do it? And he comes back and says, I thought I knew, or something along those lines. I thought I knew. And he looks completely confused and distraught and defeated. He looks very different, very vulnerable. The first time we see of vulnerability in him. It's almost as if, and again, looking at it from a psychoanalytic point of view, that he became a projective identification of the negative side of Eva. And when Eva confronted this in herself and symbolically cleaned herself of this stain, he was able to, he was no longer identifying with this projection, and he had no identity. Why he did what he did. It was as if the spell had been broken, and now his life is ruined. But it was the point at which she can then go on with her life. She had an opportunity to go on with her life. At least that's the way I saw it.
Well, Dan, what he said, I believe, if I remember exactly, be as close as I can remember, is I think he says, when she asked him, why did you do it? At the time, I thought I knew, but now I'm not so sure. And I think the really interesting element to the ending of the film is that she then embraces him, where she apparently had not done so for quite some time.
Yes. Yes. It's an excellent observation that the very last thing she does is she's able to embrace him as a separate individual, and perhaps feel some empathy at that point. At the moment that he becomes most vulnerable, she's able to show him motherly affection, which is almost redemptive from a story standpoint. Redemptive for her, not for him. The next slides I have are about the neurobiology behind this. I'm wondering if we want to talk a little bit about the film. Let me finish the next two slides, and then we'll talk about the film and see if there's any questions about it. When we talk about the neurobiology, I've been talking about all this right brain stuff. So we have this, the predator is activated, we talked about psychoanalytically, when we emerge with newness in our life, when we are on the advent of something new, a new idea, a new project, a new career, a new spouse, a new child. And very often in these times of big transitions, the predator can emerge intrapsychically. And it's as if what is happening, we are moving into deeper layers of our right brain, which houses all our emotional memory going back to childhood, going back to even intrauterine life, and constellating this unconscious material, this implicit memory, and particularly activating this limbic system. Involving the amygdala, the hippocampus, and so forth. So it's almost as if this limbic system becomes the predator. And you have to wonder if the images that are coming from the left brain and the dreams that I told you about with the client are from this activation. So, but it's almost as if we have to go there and confront this activation of the system and what emerges, which can be quite frightening, in order to get to the good stuff, the positive stuff, because it all seems to be housed together. And I remember very clearly with my client that she came in and she had a long-standing anger and hatred and estrangement from her father, who was very abusive. And she came in one session, and she said she had remembered that her father had come to visit her. He had been out of town when he came to visit her, and she was at the beach, and she was about 6 years old, and he brought her a Barbie doll. And when she remembered this, she broke down. She was crying because she was struggling with holding those two things in the same space. The memory of her father's abuse, and the memory of this act, this kind fatherly act of giving her a doll, and to hold it in the same space was just emotionally difficult for her to manage, but very important for her to manage, to be able to do. So my point is, with what's housed in the right brain is all this emotional memory that comes out in images, not words, not language, that then we deal with as it emerges from a conscious standpoint, and from a left brain standpoint, and find ways to negotiate with it. So we stop, we slowly move from seeing it as black and white, good or bad. Our past becomes more a mixture of good and bad experiences, and we start sorting those out in the course of a psychotherapy. So I wanted to give you a practical example of how the predator can emerge in the context of our lives, our practical lives, while at the same time realizing that the predator is very real out there in the world. And the last slide I have here is the hippocampus involved in the limbic system. They've shown that it's underdeveloped in trauma victims, and through the course of psychotherapy can actually develop new cells and actually grow. So the hippocampus actually, not to oversimplify it, but becomes the negotiator, and actually learns to regulate the amygdala, which is where the heavy-duty emotions are packed. So the hippocampus, when developed in the course of psychotherapy, can help to regulate the emotions so that the person who has difficulty regulating their own affect can learn how to regulate their own affect. And over time, and over a very strong therapeutic alliance with a therapist. Okay. Why don't we, Steve, you want to open up to discussion again?
Yeah.
I had a question for you, Dan, while we're doing that.
Go ahead,
Yep.
Mike.
I had the pleasure of working with Dean Stockwell on Quantum Leap when I was a trainee. And in that process of meeting him, he imparted upon me his very negative attitude towards letting your children work in film. And the thing he felt was the most dangerous was allowing a young mind to be put into a position where they were abusive to somebody, where they were, to use the term evil, or where they were in a position where they argumentative with an adult figure, because he said that you are setting them up to be, as he put it, screwed up for life. Well, as I watched this film, his words come back to me as I watched this film, because I kept thinking of the actor playing the child, and this is exactly the kind of thing he would have hated, that he would subject the child to playing this role. Do you have any opinion on that?
You mean the actual actor as a child playing this role?
Yes, in the art of making the film, you have to get this child actor to a state of mind that he says we shouldn't do that to children. If you did that to a child in a classroom, you'd be fired. If you did that to a child too often, they put you in jail. You do it on a movie set, they give you an Oscar. I mean, that's sort of the kind of thing he would say.
Yeah, I think it's a worthwhile discussion. You know, what happens? I mean, when you look at somebody like Heath Ledger, it just bothers me. Something happens to an actor, and he's a grown man. He's not even a child. He's a grown man that seemed to be doing his best work, and you have to wonder what was going on, what demons was he having to deal with, that he had to medicate himself for. And was that coming up in the course of his work, his art? And isn't there a better way for somebody to manage that, or for people to protect them? You know what I mean? I think the actor has to engage in archetypal the archetypal realm in general. And as we've discussed for Two Worlds, that's a very dangerous realm with very dark and dangerous forces that we have to learn to respect. And
Dan, if you think about an actor, right? And a good actor.
Yeah.
What are you paying them to do?
And in this case, are you
On
embodying that predatory mindset? I had the same
on a far more simple level, Steve, what you pay an actor to do is to be a very good liar.
Mm-hmm.
And they are very good liars. When you find these things out about people who you've worked with, quite often they've deceived. Their ability is the art of deception or our entertainment. Well, if they need to do it and they realize they have the toolkit. So I'm not surprised as often as people outside of my business are that when they find out, well, didn't anybody know? And the real honest answer is maybe there were one or two, but not the other 150 people who work with them every day. They really had you fooled. Because that's what they do. They fool you for a living. They're very good at it.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Steve,
yeah,
what
a couple thoughts.
say?
Well, just I was also reflecting what the young child actor, portraying Kevin, what that experience, must have been like of being at that age, yet trying to portray, that level of sociopathy. I mean, it's hard enough for an adult who has experienced life and can connect with that in different ways, but a child actor, that really did strike me of the talent and the danger even of going into that. I do want to say, though, because we're actually over time. It's a little bit after 10. We are going to try to extend it a little bit beyond. And, of course, anybody that needs to sign off for other commitments, feel free to do so. And realize there will be a recorded version that's available so people can catch that last little bit later. Want me to try to do maybe another 10 minutes or so and get some discussion going. Do remember that if anybody wants to do a verbal question, go ahead and click the raise your hand button, and we'll go ahead and open up microphones. Again, make sure to turn your speakers down so that there's no feedback, but I think that worked pretty well the last time if there's anybody that cares to do so. I do have a comment from Norway that I wanted to read to us, which is very striking. This is from Astrid Hogenstad out of Norway, and his comment is, I have signed up for the seminar today, but I will probably not be able to participate, but we'll view it later. Of course, God knows what time it is in Norway right now, but I think it's 2 a.m. or some time early morning. The topic interests me enormously as we here in Norway experienced a terror attack 1 year ago. A man, 33 years old, Norwegian, killed 77 people, mostly young people under 20. The youngest was 14 years old. 8 people were killed through a bomb, 69 people through a shooting. He had intended to kill 500 people, but did not succeed. Throughout the court process this spring, the focus was very much on diagnosis, and there has been very little focus on trying to understand why such a thing could happen. That's why I would like so much to participate in the seminar, to try to get a little bit closer to understanding. The man who did the attack says he had to do it to save Norway and Europe from Islam. But there are, of course, much deeper psychological reasons. The film We Have to Talk About Kevin is certainly a very moving film. It was shown last winter and had been postponed because it was so close to the real happenings here. They postponed it out of respect for the parents and of the close and others close to those who were killed. Kind regards, Astrid. Boy, moving comments. Any thoughts on that? Not much you can really say to that, but I'm curious people's reflections on that.
Well, I think it was very wise and very responsible of them to withhold showing the film at a time like that. I think it would have been very destructive to reactivate what was already activated by a live experience, and not necessarily be able to make any better sense of it. I think one of the things that I mentioned, this concept of contra naturam, is the situation that we confront something that simply is beyond our understanding, and it's kind of like running into a brick wall that we end up doing. Or part of individuation is running into our own unique brick wall that we're trying to find ways to move beyond. But I think for everybody, the concept of the unspeakable, of the completely incomprehensible, of why somebody would commit an act like this, constellates in us this this kind of reaching this brick wall, running into this brick wall, and what happens is it forces us to look back and look inward, okay? Because we have no easy answer for it. When we have easy answers for something, we short-circuit the learning process. When we can't answer something and we come across something so incomprehensible, it forces us to look inward.
Dan?
Yes.
On this subject, particularly
Yeah.
for what happened in Norway, I've read some material that suggests that I'll use the language of the predator. In this case, here's a man who was distinctly a predator in his actions, but his reasons for doing it was because he felt that he was the stalk, that his way of life was in jeopardy, that the outside was the predators, and he had to turn to confront the predators. Of course, in his psychosis, he's completely wrong. But I see it a lot. There's a lot of internet, I call them breeders of hate. There's a lot of internet communication that tries to color someone's fears and activate it into, defending yourself from a predator that doesn't exist. I think that goes a long way to explain a lot of things we see nowadays that didn't happen 150 years ago, where someone in a suicidal state decides they could take 25 people with them. That kind of hardcore extreme reaction, I think, is a defensive mechanism gone completely haywire, where they feel they must correct a wrong that doesn't exist. It bothers me that we see it so much, and part of me wonders if there isn't a little life imitating art in this, because we so openly express it on television. We have a 24-hour news cycle. They make big news out of it. If you want to be really well known, do like the guy in Toronto did, where he dismembered his lover and mailed them around the country, and suddenly the man's very well known. I wonder if we're not helping by being so public about these things.
Yeah, there's an interesting element in the, not so much in the film, but in the book of Kevin, around this element of viewership of the media. The media instantly broadcasting a calamity, and the predator engaging in this this event, knowing that it's filmed, knowing that they'll be infamous. And there's some discussion of that with Kevin. There's an interesting statement in the film, or dialogue in the film, in the book that wasn't in the film. The mother asked him why he didn't kill her, and his response was, why would a performer kill the audience? So I think there's an element there that
I think that layers in a lot of stuff there.
Yeah, there is this component that we didn't have 100 years ago of these crazy people that know that they're going to be famous or infamous.
Let me ask
between the two films, Dan, which did you like better?
I'm sorry. Dan. Which of the two films did I like better? I liked the way Marcy May Marlene was constructed. I liked the whole film. I like its many different layers. I did not like its lack of resolution, although I understood it. And that's why I put this together with Kevin, because I think there's resolution in Kevin and character development that that is not finished in Martha. Does that make sense?
Martha, yes, and I ask it as a filmmaker, because the methodologies for making these these films are dynamically different, and and Martha was made on a sub $700,000 budget. It was not, did not have access to any kind of mass release. It got a lot of award recognition, but didn't generate a lot of capital. But that's the new way of making films. You know, we're going to see more Marthas and we're going to see less Kevins.
Let me ask one more question from some of the email notes coming in, and then we'll probably need to wrap pretty soon because I know it's getting late for a lot of folks. And this question came about in a number of different formats, and there's been some nice, almost chatting within the question dialogue stream online. And that is, did the mother contribute to the sociopathy of Kevin in essence? To what degree was her disconnection during pregnancy when the other mothers are all excited about their parents and their children, and she sort of walks off from the yoga class, and then from the very beginning, that kind of lack of bonding that's there. I'll be very careful not to blame her. I think it'd be very wrong to blame her for that. So this needs to be looked at more in a spectrum question. But there's a lot of intense questioning out there of what was the mother's role into some degree, with the development of Kevin.
Dan, just on that question, I know you read the book, and the book seemed to be more thorough on that, but just from the film's perspective, what do you think the answer to that is?
I think the film's perspective is that her lack of attachment with her child, whether she was depressed during pregnancy or whatever her issues were, there was demonstrated a lack of attachment, and during a crucial time in his development that certainly can contribute to his sociopathy. Absolutely.
But yeah,
but the minute you say that, you're accusing her. And I think one of the things that the story is about is the shadow side of motherhood, which women have to address and probably don't speak about. And that shadow side is the hidden accusation that every child's psychopathy is somehow tied to the mother.
And that huge guilt that we see clinically in our conversations every single day, which is not fair by any means, be it it's heaped upon from society onto the backs of mothers and fathers, but probably mothers more so. And this film hits it so strikingly, but yet also lets you know from the very beginning that Kevin is dramatically different and is just wired differently too. To whatever degree her influence is there, boy, he also just comes out of the womb in a very antagonistic, aggressive.
On a note about Kevin, just to compare it factually to the events at Columbine, a lot of these things parallels don't match. There was a lawsuit brought against the parents by a handful of victims that was eventually dismissed. But the actual community as a whole did not have this predominantly negative attitude towards the parents. They felt sorry for them, and they still live in the community, and there were many people who went out of their way to say, we know what your kids did is not you. But this film seemed to receive so little sympathy for someone who lost a husband and a child to the same person that I found that a little bit of a stretch.
So it's more the fairy tale aspect of it, in that I agree that may not have been as realistic as it might have occurred in that, but it really forced her character development to really go to the very depth of despair by losing all her money, by losing all her friends, by being spat upon, and it just torn apart in the court system. I agree that's probably not realistic, but boy, it forced this really complete deconstruction of her character, and then hopefully rebirth kind of later on.
Right. Good story.
You're right on. It's good. That's right. It's a literary component because her movement into solitude is comparable to the fairy tales in which the heroine it moves into the wilderness. There's, like in the story of Rapunzel, after she's tossed out of the tower, she goes into the wilderness and is alone. There's Pinkola
in the movie I just saw, she was walking around with the prince and all the talking animals.
yeah. Don't we love those Disney versions, right?
Yeah, the Disney versions of the darkest stories.
Right.
I want to mention something that I didn't mention in the seminar, but it occurred to me now that I think is interesting. I did mention that the method of his murdering was, I think, literary and symbolic. And when we think of the Puella, Eva's Puella nature, this encapsulated bubble, inflated life that she lived, and then being brought to Earth, it from a literary standpoint, it makes sense that the arrow would be used as a weapon because he tied to her, and it's breaking this this encapsulation that she's living in, and allows her the opportunity to emerge, as you said, Steve, with a new life, a new rebirth.
Mm-hmm. Hey, well, one quick comment that just came in from Janelle here locally says, also in Columbine, the teens committed suicide, which communicates another layer.
Yes, yeah.
That's
right.
Well.
Yes.
And actually, there's the opposite in Kevin, in that supposedly he planned it 3 days before his 16th birthday. He knew he'd be tried as a teen, and then he'd get out in 2 to 4 years. So I don't know how realistic that is, but were that the case, you could imagine more of a backlash.
It has happened. It has happened. You can be released on your 21st birthday because of you were a child. I mean, certain states, I can't name which ones. Most states, if it's a major capital crime, you can be tried as an adult no matter how young you are. But theoretically, it's possible. And if you think of this as a European story, where it was shot, maybe they're even more, likelihood of being released.
Yeah, and could you imagine if this guy killed your son or daughter and then spends 4 years in jail and gets out? Boy, the rage would be pretty substantial, especially such a cold-blooded, calculated murder.
Yeah. It's interesting that in the story in the book, I don't remember in the movie, Eva writes that the timing of Kevin's killing was 10 days before Columbine. So she puts her story in historical context.
Wow.
And Kevin's reaction to that, of course, was to be pissed off that his attention was being drawn away from him.
Got upstairs. Yeah. Wow. Well, I want to thank both of you for such a marvelous job tonight. I feel like we could go all night with this conversation, which wouldn't quite be fair, but the energy it's provoked in people's responses, this has been by far the most engaging through viewer responses and comments and questions. Clearly, this has really hit a powerful chord in many people. And Dan, your insights on the archetypal world and the fairy tales and Bluebeard, it's just been wonderful. And Mike, as always, your film and psychological expertise, but particularly your film, being a director in California for decades, working in this kind of industry, really brings a new light as well. Any last thoughts? We'll close in just a moment, but Dan or Mike, anything before we kind of wrap for tonight?
Well, I'd like to make a comment on the low budgetness of these films, that this is a methodology, particularly Martha, that is going to come into vogue. I mean, it sort of already has. If you can make it for under $1 million, you got a chance. The new world is over 70 and under 1, unless you have 4,000 screen distribution, you're in trouble if you're in a mid-range sort of budget. So what you're seeing here is the future. There's going to be this underground art film kind of world, and then there's going to be the Batmans and the Spider-Mans
Right.
and the anything that can put a lot of people in the chairs.
Yeah.
I'm very happy with that, Michael. I love these films. They are low-budget films. This reminds me of Winter's Bone last year,
Yeah.
and some of the
Very
films
powerful.
that we've talked about that are very low-budget but very artistic and great films to discuss from a psychoanalytic standpoint.
Yeah. Well, do let us
think
know.
we
Send in comments. I think there'll be a survey going out. If you're a continuing education registrant, you should get a link today or tomorrow with the brief examination that will allow you to download your certificate. But let us know if you like the film series, which I suspect many of you do. We'll try to keep this going and go forward with it. So thank you once again, Dan and Mike, and we'll go ahead and sign off for now. And